Brad Edwards, ESPN Insider, joins us on the New Belgium Fat Tire Hotline. Brad, good morning. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, Bo. I've got one more day here in Connecticut until I fly out to Seattle, and I don't think it's supposed to rain, so there's a bonus.
Wow, going to Seattle with no rain. Southern Cal. I don't think that's on the radar for many SEC fans, but it's a big game. Southern Cal's playing better football under Clay Helton. They have the talent edge on paper, but, man, Washington looks like a really good football team under Peterson. Y'all are going to have a good time. How many games have you been out there for the Huskies?
This will be the second. We were out there, what was it, 4 years ago or something, when they hosted Oregon. And I want to say Washington was undefeated going to the game. It was like early October, I believe. And Steve Sarkisian was the head coach of Washington. I think that was his last year. The funny thing about it, just thinking back on it now, is that Lane Kiffin had just been fired by USC like 2 weeks earlier. And, obviously Lane and Sark go back to their USC days and are good friends and all that. And Lane was up there visiting Washington and visiting Sark that week. And I remember Sark telling us in his office, he's like, I told Lane, like, if I were you and I had, it just gotten laid off and I had all this money, like, I'd be hanging out in Fiji or something like that
Sure.
for a couple of weeks. Like, and, but he said that's just Lane. Like, Lane he just lives for football. And so he wanted to come up and use it as a time to study and, whatever. And so, thinking back on it now, that was funny because Kiffin, he never stopped working after he got fired. He went up to Washington and was studying what they were doing, studying Oregon, whatever else. And I guess it turned out all right for Lane Kiffin.
Yes, it did. Brad, I would have to believe, even though I think ADs are a little gun shy still on his, they're all cocky and egotistical, but just kind of the way Lane Kiffin is wired. But I would have to believe a month from now that he's going to be in the running for something, whether that's a Houston job if and when Herman leaves or whatever. But I would have to believe this is the year. What do you think?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, look, he has done as much as he can do to rehab his image at Alabama. Now, if nobody offered him a job, I wouldn't be surprised if he left to be a coordinator somewhere else. The problem for Kiffin staying at Alabama any longer is that if you look at some of the things that an AD or a search committee would likely be skeptical about regarding him, it would be some of the mistakes that he made as a head coach, which are things that you can't really prove anything as a coordinator that it's changed. Like really the only way to prove it is to be a head coach again. But one of the issues he had both at Tennessee and at USC is how he handled the media, and just basically kind of how he handled himself, in front of microphones and cameras. And because Nick Saban does not allow his assistant coaches to speak to the media except twice a year, once prior to the start of the season and once prior to the bowl game, then Kiffin over the last 3 years has not really even been able to show anything in terms of whether he's changed in that area. And so I think that this is probably the end of the road for him at Alabama. One of the spots I thought he could land was at Fresno State, which is his alma mater, but they just, I believe, agreed to hire Jeff Tedford. But I think there are other jobs out there. I just have a hard time seeing a major program take a chance on Kiffin. I think that he needs to start at a little bit lower level where there's not the day-to-day media scrutiny and see how he handles that first.
Brad Edwards, ESPN Insider on the Out of Bounds Show. Talking some college football. He'll be heading to Seattle, Washington this weekend, USC in Seattle. He's coming off of a trip to Baton Rouge. Brad, not a lot of offense. I still enjoyed the game. Amazing defensive plays, athleticism, physicality. I think I know what it is, but what was your one big takeaway as you walked out of Death Valley Saturday night?
Well, I guess my biggest takeaway is that Alabama is vulnerable. You and I talked about it last week, and as much as everyone likes to say they're head and shoulders above everyone else, you should have been able to see on Saturday that they're not. LSU is a very good defense. I don't think they're necessarily the second best defense in the country to Alabama. I think they're a top 5 defense. But I think there are other defenses that are as good as LSU that Alabama could potentially face in a playoff that could do something similar in terms of, loading up to stop their running game, kind of daring them to throw. And if Alabama can't generate any more offense than that, they've got a good chance to lose if they get into one of those playoff games. Now, I will say that I do think that part of Alabama's game plan was that they knew that Danny Etling was not capable of beating them. And so I think Alabama played it really close to the vest offensively because their belief was if we just keep punting it back to them, eventually we're going to get a break. And that ultimately is what happened. I think if they're playing a team with a really good defense and a better quarterback, Alabama probably doesn't call it as conservatively offensively because they know they're going to need to score 20, maybe 30 points to win the game.
So if you were College Game Day on ESPN Radio, he is Brad Edwards, our friend on ESPN 105.9 The Zone. If SEC power rankings, Brad, you go Bama 1. Do you have Auburn 2 right now?
I guess. I mean, obviously it's not anybody from the East. I think you put Auburn ahead of LSU. I think that they've both improved as the season's gone on, but by a slight margin, I would go with Auburn just because I think they're a little bit better at quarterback. I don't think Sean White is capable of winning a game for you if you're not able to run the ball, but if they're able to run and kind of keep a defense off balance, I think he's going to make more plays down the field than Danny Etling would. And otherwise, I think those teams are fairly even. But yeah, that's who I would go with right now as 2 and 3 in the SEC would be Auburn and then LSU.
Man, number 4 would be tough if you're doing SEC power rankings, Brad.
With A&M and
Arkansas,
I don't know the way that Arkansas has lost some of its games. I know the loss to State last week's not a good look for A&M, but I think I'd still have them ahead of Arkansas because Arkansas has had a couple losses where they just completely were out of their league.
Yeah. Those power rankings, that's tough. What about the college football playoff? What jumped out at you as far as the top 7 or 8 or maybe 10 where you said, I understand why they did that, or I totally disagree? Here's something. Vegas has their own poll, Brad, and Vegas has LSU at number 8. The College Football Playoff Committee has LSU at number 24. If you put LSU on a neutral field, and you're right, they're limited offensively, but they're better than 24. But anyway, as far as top 7, 8, 10, tell me what you may have agreed or disagreed, or I don't understand why they did that, or I understand why they did this.
Well, look, starting with LSU is limited offensively only if you can shut down their running game. Alabama is one of a few teams in the country that could do that. And they may be the only one that could shut it down to the degree that they have the last 2 years. But look at the previous 3 games. I know those weren't against great defenses, but look, projecting ahead to Arkansas this week, Arkansas is not going to shut down Leonard Fournette and company. I mean, they're going to run the ball on Arkansas, and that changes everything in terms of what their offense does. And I think that's the thing that people nationally miss is that they look at what Alabama does to LSU, and they think, oh, you know what, this team stinks. And the truth is there are very, very few teams that could stop LSU from running the ball. And if you can't stop them, you're in for a long night. So that's the difference between where the committee has them ranked and where Vegas has them ranked. I mean, just from the committee perspective, LSU hasn't beaten anybody. Their best win, I think, is still against Ole Miss. And then they've basically had 3 chances to prove themselves against a good team, and they've lost all 3. And so I get it from a kind of resume standpoint why you would rank them much lower if you're the committee. In terms of just other things they did in the rankings, what jumps out is the inconsistency. And it's not just week to week. It's even within the same week. And I wouldn't even say it's unique to this year. We saw some of this the past 2 years. But, for example, they said the other night that the reason that A&M was 4 last week and Ohio State is 5 behind Washington this week is that A&M had a loss at Alabama that was better than Ohio State's loss at Penn State. And that's the first time I can remember them citing the quality of a loss as a reason for doing something. And I would throw this out there that Ohio State has 3 wins over the committee's top 20. A&M only had 1. And while they're making it sound like Ohio State has a bad loss, and I don't think Penn State's a great team, the committee has them ranked at number 10. So you're saying that a loss on the road against the number 10 team in your rankings is not a good loss? I don't get that at all. But the thing is as they're sitting there saying that, okay, that the quality of loss is the difference between what happened last week and this week at 4 and 5, then you look at A&M, which has a loss to Mississippi State, and they're still there at number 8. I mean, they say it's because of the head-to-head over Auburn, and they can't drop Auburn further back to punish A&M. They're kind of grasping. Bo, what it comes down to is that the 5 teams that are up top, regardless of what order they would have been in this week, those top 5 are pretty much in control of what happens to them. The only exception would be if Michigan loses to Iowa this week. Then all of a sudden Ohio State could be in big trouble in terms of the tiebreaker in the Big Ten East and losing it to Penn State. But as long as Michigan doesn't lose to Iowa, those top 5, by winning out, are going to be in the playoff. Obviously, they can't all win out because Ohio State and Michigan play each other. And then after that, the only other 2 teams that I think have a remotely realistic chance are Wisconsin and Auburn, because I think by winning the rest of their games, even though you certainly wouldn't favor them to do that, if they are able to do it, I think they put themselves in a position where there's a really good chance the selection committee would take them. But other than that, anyone else outside of those, 7 teams, I think has a incredibly remote chance of getting him. I think that includes Louisville at number 6.
Wow. Brad Edwards, ESPN insider on the New Belgium Fat Tower Hotline, talking college football and the playoff. Brad, can you believe? I mean, this is where we are right now in college football, and I don't think these are really, really good teams. I am impressed with what Mike McIntyre is doing, but Penn State at 10 and Colorado at 12? I mean, Holy smokes, Brad.
Well, so look, Bo, what it comes down to is that we have 4 Power 5 unbeaten teams. And in the Power 5 conferences, there are only 3 one-loss teams. And one of those is West Virginia, which lost to Oklahoma State, and their best win is over BYU. So we have 7 teams in the Power 5 with fewer than 2 losses, and one of them isn't even considered a contender for the playoff. And that's where we are. And as I was saying about Louisville earlier, obviously they're one of those teams. I think their only path to the playoff is this. I think they need Alabama, Clemson, and Michigan all to win their respective conferences, because I don't think Louisville is going to beat out any of those teams if it comes down to Louisville and any one of those 3 being an 11-1 non-champion. I think that team is going to trump Louisville in each case. So they might as well just have them win out. And if Alabama, Clemson, Michigan all win out, that means that Louisville is the only non-champion in the ACC, SEC, or Big Ten that has fewer than 2 losses. And then that's the first thing they need. The second thing they need is for Washington to not be the Pac-12 champion. And if that happens, I think Louisville gets in. Anything other than that, I think it's a really tough case to make for them.
Yeah, because if USC loses this weekend, Brad, as you know, Colorado's got a nice schedule, even though they're not really good. I know they have to play Utah, but they've got a pretty good schedule. They could pull this off, even though USC's the better team, and I know Colorado should have beat them, but I'm talking about talent profile. Colorado could pull this off in the Pac-12 South.
They could. Look, I mean, there's a chance, and this is kind of the ideal scenario for Louisville, is that Washington State wins the Apple Cup, and we end up with a Washington State versus Colorado Pac-12 championship.
Yeah.
If that happens, isn't that sexy? If that happens, then you are not going to have a Pac-12 team in the playoff, and that's what would open the door for Louisville to get in.
Gotcha.
Now, look, here's the crazy thing about that is that the committee has told us for 3 years that what they want is the 4 best teams in the playoff, and we have discussed it ad nauseum that that's not actually what they want.
No.
And here's how you know, because I've made this statement before in the last couple of weeks, that if the committee were to go in on that final day, December 4th, and they were to come out and say, okay, here are our top 3 seeds, 1, 2, 3, we're going back in the room and we're going to talk for 2 more hours and figure out who the 4th seed is. If you then had the chance to interview the coaches of the 3 teams that were in, and you asked them, what team do you not want to be the 4th team in? They all would say Louisville. That's the team that they don't want to play out of the remaining group. But the selection committee doesn't define best that way. That's how I define best.
Right.
Who would not want to play? But the committee is going to make it some combination of eye test and resume and did you win a conference championship and all these things. They're going to start putting numbers on it, and once you do that and you start trying to quantify certain things, then the case for Louisville becomes much weaker.
Fair enough. Brad Edwards and Dave Bartu should be on the College Football Playoff Committee. But we are where we are. So that's Brad Edwards, ESPN Insider. And, Brad, have a great trip out west, and we'll do this again next week, bud.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, man. Brad Edwards.